Okay. Great. Well, welcome, everyone. Are two people online that from the public or the?
No, this is just our setup, but it is being streamed and everything.
Okay, so welcome to anyone who's joining us online, or I guess anyone in the future. Are we now recording these to?
Yeah. We are, yes.
Yeah, good. So welcome. Welcome everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order with the acknowledgement that we are meeting on the traditional unceded lands of Musqueam people. Forward motion that the board approve the April 2024, April 16th agenda as circulated. Seconder. All in favor? Passes. Just note for the minutes, we've got all directors and members present except for the AMS. Also move that the board approve the March 12th, 2024 minutes as circulated. Seconder. Eagle. All in favor? All in favor? Motion approved. Very good. So our first external report is the campus community planning. Carol, bring us through that.
Thanks, Richard. Hi, everyone. The report is before you. I'm happy to take questions back to the team or attempt to answer them myself if anyone has any. Maybe I'll also just say that we really appreciated the submission from the UNA on the Neighborhood Climate Action Plan, so thank you for that feedback. And I believe that the team will be meeting with the UNA board again to review the draft plan.
For that, yeah.
Thanks, Carol. I wanted to express my thanks and to ask you to pass along my thanks to the Campus and Community Planning Compliance Officer, who is in charge of making sure that the various building projects around the neighborhoods are in compliance with the hours of operation and noise-related regulations and whatnot. And there were a couple of incidents. I'll just relay them now, and I also, of course, shared them earlier by email. At the Lot 6 site, which is right over there, there was at least one and maybe more deliveries before the starting hours, so very early morning deliveries that were not approved in advance, and so that was something that was of concern to residents who were woken up by the early morning arrival of some loud equipment. And then the other was on Saturday morning, it was a day of concrete pouring. And apparently, although none of my neighbors were aware of this, there had been a variance given for them to start at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. But then we kind of dug that out of our emails later, and it come through, and thanks to the UNA staff for properly communicating that in the way that they should have. What we ended up discussing on that front was that while a variance had been given, that a variance for 6:30 a.m. start on a Saturday morning is something that should really only happen in absolutely exceptional circumstances, and it woke people up and down the road there and next door as well. There are hundreds of units and people adjacent to the site, such that something like that would wake them up on a Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m. And so I think my understanding from the compliance officer is that is something that they will strive to avoid at almost all costs, that there are alternatives to starting at 6:30 a.m. even when you have a long day of work that has to take place. So, concrete pouring is one where you kind of need to keep going, right? So, but it's better to run later into the late afternoon, start at 6:30 a.m. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being responsive to the concerns from residents, and then also, I guess, affects people's lives in concrete ways when the pouring starts at 6:30.
Thanks, Eagle. Did you want to respond?
Thanks, Eagle. I always appreciate a good pun. But even more so, I'll take your comments back to the team, and I know they appreciated the conversation they had with you as well. So thanks for bringing those comments forward, and I'll make sure that they get your comments tonight too.
Any other questions, comments? I have one that's kind of similar over at Hawthorne. There was, I noticed there wasn't an item on April 13th, Saturday, this past Saturday. There was an event in the park just beside the old, across Thunderbird Boulevard. It was the Bangladesh Society, and they had they had a live band, and they were, I would say that, I mean, I didn't hear any complaints, so that's good. But I just noted that we didn't get information about it or warning on it. And they did, I think they did shut down right around 10 o'clock, which was good. But it was certainly a notable thing. And I would ask, two things. Get on the schedule so people know about it. They're prepared and not taken by surprise, and they want to join in. And then the second thing is, I don't know that it seemed that was louder than the Holy celebration, which was a block away the week before.
Can just respond. I'm surprised to hear that there was no event notification. So I'm going to take that back to the team, to the events team, and just do some investigation on that one. And I'll get back to Paul on what went amiss in that, because the UNA should be notified in cases like that. So
just to pile on, it was very loud,
okay.
Really loud. Like my kids go to bed much before that, and windows were closed and everything, booming bass, etc. So 10 o'clock was great, but yeah.
Maybe Richard or Murray, if someone could send your observations to Paul on the timing, that would be really helpful for me, because then we'll do some investigation on what happened in this case.
Great, thanks. Wait.
I just want to fill in some information. So the UNA did receive an email on April 9th, and then I happened to be on the day that I returned from vacation. So the information, unfortunately, I overlooked on the information and haven't forward as usual practice with all the residents. Yeah. So this is something that, for my fault, that I haven't shared information on a timely manner.
Okay. Sure. Thank you, Wayland. I think that's very responsible of you. It's good, but it's also maybe 3 days before is not enough time, right? An advance notice. Plus, an event like that, like Holy Week, was in your report here.
It should be.
And it should be there. So
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any other questions? Thanks very much. The next item is the electoral area A, Director of Monthly Report. Jen McCutcheon's unable to attend. She's coaching, doing a good volunteer community work. Are there any comments? The report is there. Are there any comments that people would like to ask about or pass on to Jen? Go ahead.
I'll just say that I've appreciated her regular updates about the impending water concerns, the low snowpack and all of that. And I'm sure it's something that the staff and all of us are kind of keeping an eye on, but it may have implications for us in the summer to come. And thanks to her for bringing that up, but also to put a point on it that we should stay on top of that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the management report.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to provide the report for April for the UNA management team. The first section of the report that I'll speak to, the report that I was directly undertaking this month. If there are any questions about any of the specific items, I'm happy to respond to them. I did want to highlight probably 2 or 3 things from the listing. One was this past month was a fair bit of participation in the engagement on the NCAP. I was able to attend a number of community events as part of the engagement program, so that was quite good to see and see some of the turnout by our residents in those events. I did want to highlight, and I know Athena will speak to it in her section about we're at year end and we're also in the process of implementing a new financial system, and I really just from the board want to give kudos to Athena and the rest of the management team on year end and the implementation of a new financial system at the same time. It's a significant amount of work that puts us in a great position going forward in the future, but it is a confluence of things that makes it quite challenging. So I just want to provide that thanks to the team. Other than that, that's it from me from the CAO's report.
Thanks, Paul. Are there any questions or comments? That's great. Okay, let's move on to Glenda and the communications.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. A couple of things to highlight on my report. We're currently finalizing the UNA guidebook for newcomers. We are going to be presenting that in the May board meeting. Give you a draft and also a summary of the contents. And the UNA website, we're currently in meetings with our web team, looking into upgrading some of the infrastructure there, just to make sure that we have a much more stable website. They're working in cooperation with our IT team for that one. I'm happy to answer any other questions about my report.
Thanks, Glenda. We've got questions. Just one question about timing, maybe. The newcomers mini website and report at that mini site. Can you tell us when you hope to get that, like what the schedule was?
Right. Once we present it to you guys in May, we plan on launching it by June. Yeah.
Very good.
Oh, something else, sorry. I wanted to also just give you a heads up that next month we're planning on submitting a report on what our findings and our proposal in terms of like the frequency of publication schedule of the campus resident. So that's coming up as well.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so unfortunately, Dave's not here tonight, but Paul, could you maybe brief us on the recreation aspect of this report?
Please do. See the typical data in terms of service delivery on the recreation side continues to be busy operations. I know there were 2 items that I wanted to highlight in this month's report, one of which is Mr. Gillis and his team have come to the end of a fairly significant round of new hires in the department, refilling some turnover and filling some positions that were open, including our newcomer and volunteer coordinator position, which you've heard about leading up to this. So this month really should see a return to 100% staffing levels within the recreation department. So that is good to see and bodes well as we head through the spring in a fairly busy time. Just also wanted to highlight our volunteer and newcomer coordinator. As you know, that's been filled, and we have our first group meeting with representatives from UBC and otherwise on moving forward on the newcomer programs as we head to the which aligns with the work that's being done through communications on the guide and the website. So things are aligning quite nicely in that regard. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I have a question about the new position of volunteer newcomer support coordinator. So because I know previously UNA had two volunteer coordinators. One is taking care of adult volunteers, another one taking care of the youth volunteers. I wonder if we still keep these two positions for adults and the youth.
Yes, there is still the two positions. We are in the process of refilling the youth coordinator position.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, I know Peng Wang, the new volunteer newcomer support coordinator, is preparing for the newcomer programming, the instruction. And meanwhile, I wonder if there's any investigation about the existing volunteer system, including volunteer orientation, volunteer training, and volunteer recognition. I saw the staff plan later in this package about volunteer appreciation or recognition. But is there any plan to just investigate the current volunteer system?
That's very much part of that position. And the first part of Peng's engagement in the organization is to come up to speed on the volunteer program. You did mention the volunteer recognition event will be held and some planning for doing more than one event in this next coming year to make sure we're covering that off. Worked hard on a comprehensive listing and database of our volunteers, so we're able to track who's participating as a volunteer and make sure that we're able to recognize those going forward. That will be an important part of volunteer.
Thank you.
Sure. I was curious on the dates. So when I see a category spring 2024, what is that? Is that a strict season of 3 months, or just look at the comparison to the last 2 years, spring 22 and 23, and then looking at the totals on the table, orange yellow colored one, they're significantly lower for 24. I presume that's because we're only partway through, but I wasn't sure. Does that go till June 21st, or what is the comparison? How should we interpret that?
Actually, I might look at the team who might know the breakdown when we go to the next programs out of spring. But I think you're quite correct in the analysis that we're not done spring yet, but I can't tell you exactly when that comes.
Just noting that, yeah, there's if it isn't going to continue, if there's not revenue anticipated, that seems like a significant drop from last year. Okay, Finn.
Yeah, I have another question, probably not very related to recreation, but it's just inspired by the recreation team update the data. The new residents continue to move into the UNA neighborhoods because we can identify that through the new residents who enrolled in our registration system. But meanwhile, I know lots of people are also moving out of this neighborhood. So is there a tracking system to identify the inactive members and identify how many people we are supposed to serve? Because, for example, some people, they moved out of this neighborhood, but they still continually coming back and enjoying the free services and space and facilities. How we identify this issue and just timely identify people who have moved out without active membership.
Yeah, I think until there's an opportunity to or a necessity for someone to renew their membership, we can't really track whether they're residents or not. When that happens, that would be the time when we can see clearly whether someone is a resident or not, and those benefits of being a member cease as a result.
Thank you. Questions? Okay, well, let's move on to the operations and sustainability.
Thank you very much, Richard. So the report is before everyone. Happy to answer any questions. And a quick highlight for this month is just want to have a new welcome message for our new sustainability specialist, Isabel. She has experience and background of urban forestry, and she's from UBC as well. There are good connections moving forward between the UNA, especially we are looking at a round of looking at tree health around all the UNA areas. So we'd like to share this positive news. She just joined us as of today. Today's her first day. So welcome to her.
Eagle.
Thanks, Will. That's very exciting that we have a new sustainability coordinator. We're on the community. We have a community garden plot, and so they would do have had communications with Robin. And I'm wondering about the email addresses and contact information. I think in the past it's been the email address of the staff member as opposed to a more generic email address, like for example, sustainability at I'm not totally sure about that, but I know that most of the communications were directly with Robin. So, and if you look on the website, quite a few of them have her contact info. So I'm wondering about if it's possible to transition to a system where you have an email address that is general, regardless of who holds the position.
Thank you, Igor. Definitely noted with your recommendations. So for sustainability, we don't have a general email at the moment, but we will review it. But for your information like community gardens, we do have a general email for community gardeners to reach out. So thanks for your input. Definitely we can review that for the sustainability. Thank you. Bill.
Yes, I have a couple of parking questions. The first is the parking in Hampton Place. The signs say no parking certain hours except maintenance and authorized vehicles. Well, nobody seems to know what maintenance vehicles are. We have quite a few tradespeople who come, some in marked vehicles, some not in marked vehicles. So first of all, could you let us know what the maintenance vehicles are? And then I think residents should be informed too, so we all understand.
Yeah, for sure. So for a maintenance or service vehicle, it will be commercial vehicle with signed. For example, if I just an example of gardeners, there will be a pickup truck with a Badger Earthwork or Meridian Earthwork signage on it. So that's considered as a maintenance and service vehicle, and they will be able to park on the street while they're attending local buildings. While the area that the future on will be designated as a residential permit only area. And for personal vehicle, for example, if trades coming in with a personal vehicle, we would recommend the trades to use the inside property visitor parking that's available in our building. And however, there is also other options that we can work with the residents as well. For example, residents can utilize a visitor parking permit by purchase the UNA Hampton visitor parking permit and hand over the visitor parking permit for trades while they are visiting and doing work on site. Or alternatively, if the residents would not want to pay for the visitor parking permit, there is a 15 complimentary day pass that the UNA parking office offered to each address. So residents can obtain a free day pass on the day of the trades coming in with their personal vehicle and have the trades display the day pass so that it will enable them to park in any of the restricted parking area that you mentioned.
Thank you, Wiggle. That's useful information. And I would encourage you to have it published in the UNA newsletter and also sent out to all the strata councils at Hampton Place. My second question is, I'm just following up on something I raised last time, and that is the letter from Moti from 2014 that says basically they want every vehicle to receive one warning before it's going to be towed. And you said that's not actually happening, and you were going to look further into it. I just wonder if there's anything further to report on that.
Thank you, Bill. So at this moment, I don't have any further to report, but for Hampton Place enforcement, we are following the the one morning before towing. So it has been followed up by our refrigerator for Hampton Place. And just a quick follow-up in terms for your first inquiry about sharing more information with the Hampton Strata. Thank you for your input. Definitely is something that I'm working on, is to create a training video that I will be able to share with what the Hampton Strata chair, going a little bit more detail in terms of visually of our where to park and parking rules and other things along the line related to Hampton parking enforcement.
Thank you, both Bill and Wakeland, on that. I have a suggestion with regard to Bill's comments. That maintenance issue seems to go in Hawthorne every time, and every time there's this changeover of strata or anything, people ask that question. So it keeps coming up. I'm thinking maybe if you had an FAQ sheet regarding parking, that would be the type of thing that would go on there, in addition to new training to Hampton Place, but also for everyone.
Yeah, just further to that, I would encourage you to put it on the website too, so that people don't want to have to watch a whole video if they just wonder what maintenance means. They should be able to go to the website and quickly find what vehicles are permitted and without spending much time.
Definitely. So noted in terms of the input, and we do have an FAQ session on the webpage, but however, with the service and maintenance vehicle, that's the information that we missed. So definitely noted, and I'm happy to add those information on the webpage.
Thank you. Any other questions for Whitman? Not hearing that, let's go to the finance report from Tina.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, my report is before you. As what Paul has highlighted before, yes, right now is a very busy time for my team because of the year-end closing. We're dealing with the existing system, and the new system we will be loaded for the new year. So we're kind of like managing two systems at the same time right now. So it's a little bit of a pulling hair time, I would say, for my team. But I think after that, we will have a much more powerful system. So the audit will also, by doing this way, even though it's a little bit challenging, just to give you a little bit more information, the audit will be very clean because all the physical year-end information will be in the Prior system. So the cutoff is actually very complete. And then when the new year comes or when next audit comes, it will be auditing only in the new system. So there's no managing auditing two system, which will take longer. And then the balances will be, the cutoff might not be clean. So I think it's a better way. I think when we are considering the timing, so that's all factored into the picture. But it is a bit more challenging for my team to kind of doing everything at the same time, but I think it's a good decision. I still very convinced at this point it's a very good decision, and the timeline and such. Yeah, I think I will also share a little bit later, which will I have a report to cover. Will be the project, so we'll discuss further in that. So other than that, happy to answer any question.
Thank you. Questions for? Just have one comment, Athena. I hope you're getting some sleep. Sounds like you've got lots of work. Good. Okay, well, let's move on to the 2023 UNA plan.
Thank you very much. Before is a report giving the update on the fourth quarter of the 23-24 UNA staff work plan. The board will recall this work plan is based on the board's strategic plan, the series of projects and initiatives aligned with the priorities established under the strategic plan. The report does highlight a few areas, but you can see in the full listing in the attachment quite a bit of progress has been made on those strategic priorities, and we'd certainly be happy to answer any questions you may have about specific.
Thanks, Paul. We got questions for him on the fourth quarter update. Thank you very much, Paul. That's a good report. Let's move on to the UNA staff work plan.
So that transitions us directly into the 24-25 staff work plan, which again is modeled on the 23-24 approach, where under the strategic priorities established by the board, staff lays out a series of initiatives and work that aligns with those priorities and will go towards progress on reaching their goals or targets that have been established by this board's priorities for the term. This is done with an eye to existing resources within the organization and a level of comfort that we're able to undertake the work with the existing resources. There are a number of, I think, fairly significant items and progress on, or work towards progress on the board's strategic priorities. And the report does highlight a few of those initiatives, though the appendices, as you'll note, has quite a bit more detail. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Paul. We got questions or comments? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, for this plan. And I wonder, is there any plan for considering how to solve the residents' increasing needs about the facilities, the hardware? For example, the dancing studio, the bar is not sufficient. So it has happened for several months, and so far, because I registered for dancing classes, and every class we use chair. Some participants have to use the chair to practice dance. So I just wonder, is there any solution or plan undergoing?
Yeah, thank you. I believe that's been raised in the past, and Mr. Gillis responded to a question of the board a couple of cycles ago. Staff are looking into a solution, whether that's a portable bar or a more permanent solution, but they haven't come to the final solution yet, but it is an aspect that they're certainly looking into.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bill?
I have a question about one item under governance. It says work with UBC and NCAP to retrofit existing transportation network to improve resilience and safety. And I didn't know what that means.
Actually, maybe refer to Mr. Sid.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Paul. So for that one, it's mainly, for example, setting up water fountain and setting up shading structure in key high traffic route, so that active transportation like scooters, bikers will be able to replenish themselves during a hot summer day. So that's a few smaller projects related to that.
Okay, I'd suggest actually describing it somewhat differently then, because that isn't anywhere close to what I would take from those words. I would suggest maybe revising the work plan a little bit just to explain that.
Thank you, Bill. There comments or questions? Okay.
Sorry, I have another question. There is the plan of developing the recognition policy for the staff. So I just wonder, is there any performance review system existing now? Because regularly the performance review will include the staff recognition. For example, if staff has a very excellent work performance, there might be the bonus or something like that. So I wonder if there's any this kind of system existing.
Thank you for that. Yes, there is an annual performance review system that's built into it around this time of the year as we head into the data coming from Stats Canada on the COLA increase. We do our performance reviews as part of that process. This is meant to go beyond just the financial compensation aspect of performance and looking for other ways to recognize staff in their positions beyond
I'll move right now that the board approve the 2024-25 UNA staff work plan as circulated, and maybe there's an additional word commented on so that there's flexibility for advising in particular that one. So I'm going to move that. Do we have a seconder? Bill? Discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. That's great. Okay, so now we're on to the board projects report, and Athena, lead us through that.
The report is before you. The list of project is also enclosed. Just to just emphasize that this list, you have seen it before. This is the identical list as what I have presented the final budget for, I think, in February. So there's no changes. Just wanted to say, the reason, one part of the reason why there's a separate list of projects. So none of this actually, let's just put it this way. So all the required project has to happen during the year, has already been embedded into the budget. So this list is actually in the, is it good to have, but why is it good to have is like, for example, an operation vehicle that the organization does not have it, but it will be super helpful if we do have it. So it's actually a list that come up by the department that, that with many review that we still want to bring forward to the board to review. Another reason why we are doing it this way compared to before is like there is a bunch of money in the board contingency set aside, but for, I think at least for the last 2-3 years, and when I'm in this position, those are never been exercised or been used. So the money, the budget year come and go, and then the money just sit there and then not doing anything, not being utilized. So another way for the management to decide is like, oh, maybe we just bring forward a list and then we give some guidance and direction for the board to consider. So yeah, maybe Bill, you can add to it. Yeah.
Sure. In the finance committee, we decided that well, this was brought forward by staff, but we agreed with the approach, and it gives the board some input into the, priorities for matters that are not essential. In a way, it responds somewhat to some of the criticism that's been made of the budget process. The board itself is going to decide on these particular projects. The finance committee isn't making any recommendations because we thought it should be left to the board as a whole to determine. We don't have any special expertise in determining whether these particular projects should go ahead. The other thing I'd add is that it's not an all or nothing. And if any board member sees a project here that they don't think should proceed, they should flag it and we can discuss it. On the other hand, if all the projects look fine and we don't want to save any money for possibly some other project that comes along midway through the year, then we can just approve the whole list. So that's a little more background on the projects.
Thanks, Bill. Eagle, did you want to go ahead? Sure. Go ahead, Carol.
Thanks for this. I'm curious about where the total amounts have come from, or how are they derived, and maybe the reason why. Well, I'll tell you the reason why I'm asking is I'm just looking at the dog park implementation with the price tag of $20,000, and if that project proceeds, I am imagining it would have a higher price tag. So I'm curious is this intended to be partial investments, and I'm curious about where the total amounts have come from.
Go ahead. Do you want to talk to that, Wayland?
But I can't.
Here, I'll start and then pick up where I missed it. To the best of staff's ability, at the time when this list was created, there were price numbers put to it. Dog Park one in particular, at the time, there was no knowledge of what that project might look like. There still isn't to a degree because the board hasn't considered recommendation on the location. I would agree with your analysis that it's the $20,000 that's listed there is likely to be significantly insufficient to execute that project. We do believe we will have other routes for funds to make that project viable once the board has given discussion on location. So this is some seed funding, I guess, for lack of a better description.
Can I just ask? Sorry, just to follow up. So with the exception of the dog park, or all the other projects, based on the best information that you have at the time of this, considered to be fully funded?
I believe that's correct, and I look over to my staff till I see a lot of yeses.
Yes, but there is some, let's say, for example, too bad Dave is not here, but for example, with increasing some of the hours, so those could be continued to increase, but with the scope that we bring forward, yes, that is fully funded.
Thank you. I do have some comments. Just let all board members have a chance to speak if they need to.
Two questions. One general is, so just the recommended or proposed list of projects totals 103K. And am I right that there is an allocation of 103K tentatively set aside? So that's sort of matching that. Okay. And then, just to clarify, Athena, you said in prior years we've had this contingency or this availability and we haven't used it. So it's the money has accrued over, no. Can you clarify that?
No, budget is budget. When you don't use it, means that the project is not going ahead. We will just, the money just doesn't carry forward, yeah. So animal enforcement is one of those that has been sitting in that, but nothing was bought for it. So that's why, so this dog one might be a bad example. But anyhow, like at that time, yeah, that's
Yeah, I could add a little bit to that, if a budget, if no projects go ahead, and if everything else is on budget, there'll be a surplus. If that money will be a surplus, it'll go into, keep forgetting what it's called. Unrestricted reserve, thank you. And so there's more money in the end, essentially in the UNA surplus, so could be used in a future year. It's not totally lost, it's just moves to a different category.
And you just want to follow up there?
Well, just a second question, if I may. Thank you. Just around the operations vehicle. So Gator truck, I think I see athletics roaming around in these little Gators. I would have thought you could buy one of those little guys for less than 15K, and we're proposing to lease them for 15K. It just seemed quite expensive.
Thank you for input. For the operations vehicle Gator truck, you may be surprised how much they actually cost. The going average price for them is approximately at 65K each. Of course, I'm also considering not the base price, but adding some additional equipment as well. But having said that, usually we are looking at 50 to 60K per vehicle.
We're not talking about the same vehicle.
That sounds like a Tesla.
No, but I wanted to verify that because there's a sports store next to the ferry terminal, the mid-Tsawwassen Mall, and they have those for fishing expeditions or things, and they are 60 to 100,000. And I was shocked when I saw that. I thought, what the heck? But I mean, if that price is real, I've seen it. Okay, Eagle.
Maybe this is too early to be bringing this up, but is it possible to get an electric Gator truck? Because I mean, there are a few issues there. One, just our sustainability commitments, but also there's just not a gas station out here. You know, I suppose you can, you know, bring a gas can full of gas or diesel or whatever, but in any case, you know, it'd be worth looking at it. If you're leasing it for 15,000 a year, maybe you could lease an electric one so do a gas guzzling. So,
You got an answer for us, Wait.
I don't have a good definite answer, but we did review some of the EV options as well. It's more maybe about the carrying capacity. So for this data truck, it's not just carrying crew, but also we have intended to move heavier items, for example, tents in between different facilities. So it is intended to carry items as well as putting a trailer. And finally, in terms of gas fuel, luckily we have access. I would assume we will eventually have access to UBC plant operations refuel station.
Okay, thank you. Are we finished with the end of truck? Okay, I have a couple comments, and it relates back to this dog park implementation. Now, just understanding, again, I'm backing up a little bit, but we've got $103,000 that the board already approved. And that was sort of a blank thing that went into the budget. This is filling in the details for it. So my question is the items here, and I'm going to maybe just pick on 3 of them. The Green Depot extended hours, the fitness attendant services, and the mental health program. Those 3 items seem to be, I think they're reasonable and good projects, but I'm wondering if they're more like an operational thing that is likely to repeat in the following year, right? If it works out that you got more fitness attendant hours, you probably want to do it in the year to come. So is this, by committing to these, are we committing to probably increase the budget or fill that in the coming years?
Yes, but I think I will let probably Wetland to talk about the Green Depot and because that is actually in his top priority. I mean, so I will let him talk a little bit more into this one.
Yes, so thank you, Richard, for bringing that up. So for the Green Depot, with the extended hours, we will also increase the existing hours for the current part-time staff member as well that is working at Green Depot. And part of the plan is once we increase the staff hours for the Green Depot for certain positions, they will also expand the scope of work. That will also including community engagement, training of volunteers, and things related to increasing and improve the capacity of the overall operations for the recycling and Green Depot. So I hope I did answer your question.
Okay. Yes, that does give me insight because the other items are more or less one-off items, right? But we approve them.
Not the lease.
Well, the lease is another one where you probably continue that too. Yeah. Okay. Having said that, I want to now look at the dog park implementation. And my understanding and my hope is that we are able to progress and eventually have a dog park at some point in the future. This year, I do see it as it may be public consultation and planning, and perhaps that's what that budget item is for this year, and maybe in the public consultation planning, as that unfolds, then we prepare something for next year's budget which includes upgrade stuff like park benches and amenities, landscape things.
Yes, I think your characterization of it is fairly accurate. I referred to it in my response previously as kind of seed money for the project, which I think is that kind of design and planning side, perhaps the engagement piece, depending on the direction of the board. Maybe there'd be enough for a little bit of that might go towards the capital aspects of the requirements, where they turn out to be. I am hopeful still, though, that we're able to do that planning and design work at direction from the board, do the engagement, make the applications, and have the ability to begin the actual installation of a dog park this year. I think we have other sources for capital funding that we can bring to the board for the board's direction on, and we will do that as part of this process. So the goal is to move relatively quickly within this year to have an off-leash area well-defined, accepted by the community and the board, and at least the start of the implementation.
Okay, so in other words, if we approve this and all the other projects, we're not limiting the dog park. There potentially is a where to proceed.
I think there are sources of funds that are available to the board to consider, and the board isn't limiting itself by approving other projects under this.
Thank you very much. Any other questions here? Oh, Carol?
I have a question on process, and maybe it's for Bill. I'm wondering about so I understand the value in doing something like this that builds transparency into what the board is prioritizing for projects. And I think there's a benefit in doing that. I also wonder, just sort of building on Richard's earlier comment, was it discussed at the Finance Committee to consider you have this $103,000 to prioritize projects? I'm presuming the priority of these initiatives have a timeline attached to them. Wegland alluded to the Green Depot being top priority. Did the Finance Committee discuss bringing projects to the board for approval as they come to fruition so that you fully understand the cost and the scope, knowing that some of these projects may be priced differently when they're fully scoped, and just the board approving them as they come in, giving sort of general direction that these look good. But I guess I worry if the board were to approve this list, does it mean that if a project comes over budget or the priorities have to shift because of the cost items, does it require the board to come back and reconsider? And I'm just curious about that process.
Yeah, simple answer, no, we didn't get into that aspect. We were presented with essentially, I think it was a longer list to start with, but it might have been pared down if I'm correct, because to fit within the 103 that became available. So no, but that's an excellent point. And what we could do tonight is approve the projects that are highest priority and leave the others for approval for another day. I mean, that's open to the board to do. So that may be a good way to proceed.
Okay, yeah, understanding that there's space in the budget, that would allow us to adjust as information becomes available. Okay, having said that, do we have a priority? I can say that I want that dog park budget in there, but and I think, yeah, I mean, they look good, but is there a priority from the board or from the staff even?
From my perspective, for those are not in priority, don't even make it to this list, to be very honest to you. Because the list was like arm length long, and then we cut to this point. But that being said, unfortunately, Dave is not here, but I will let Wegner stick to the operation one he has. He will give you some sort of his feedback regarding that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for touching base with the team as well. First of all, I agree with Athena for all the items here will be the priority, but out of the priorities that we provide here, the most important item that I can see from operation is the Green Depot extend, and also to support of dog park implementation. Those are the two priorities that I see out of the list at the moment.
Eagle. Yeah, just a question, Carol brought this up, but also to others who are suggesting that we consider voting on these one at a time. And is is the issue that you or we would want to see a more detailed costing on these various projects? And this is a weird exercise, I'll just say, and I've already kind of expressed my thoughts that maybe this just should be part of the budgeting process, and that if you don't know precisely what you want to spend in terms of operations, so you do have an operations budget, and then within that budget, if there's something that requires board approval, that can come to the board, but at least you're foreseeing that you're going to have approximately 15,000 per vehicle. And so, it gets put in the budget earlier. I'm not sure why we end up separating out $103,000 worth in it. I have a short memory, so there was a reason why we did this, but it's just it less and less clear to me why we've done that. So if that's the case, could not we also budget? In other words, pass this as a budget for these things, but it's not a final approval of the projects, that they would then need to be costed and brought for approval to the board. I mean, some of them are just like straightforward operations, and if they were in the budget originally, they wouldn't come to the board, right? So I'm not quite sure how to deal with that, but I think most of them are ones that maybe all of them are ones that we'd like to see go ahead, probably, unless there's disagreement on the board. But it's mostly just a question, like you say, of process. But like, what are we going to do then? Like, vote down some of them now? Anyway, I would propose that we approve them as budgeted, and then in the case where it's appropriate, we ask for a detailed proposal and plan that would come to the board as they are fully costed and developed. I think they're mostly costed, so it's not actually lacking. It's just we don't have it in front of us, and that wasn't what the staff were prepared today.
Sorry. Bill, if you could go next, and then Carol.
Okay, I think to maybe present a different perspective from Eagle's, and Eagle didn't come on the finance committee until near the end, so he hasn't seen the whole process. But the feeling was there are some projects that staff thought would be good to do, but they didn't have to be done, and the board should have a say. We all know that if something gets put into the budget, the board rarely digs into it and says, well, do we really need this item or that item? That just doesn't happen. So this is a way to make it happen, where you take certain projects and say, do we really want to do that project? And so the board has some input, much more than it would have if it's just presented with a budget with a whole ream of numbers, and it's not gonna. And then it's told later on, well, you approved the budget, so you approved this project and that project, even though you couldn't see that in the budget. So I think there is merit in this approach. Whether the next board wants to continue it is up to it, but I think there is some merit. So I would suggest that we've been told two items are highest priority. I would suggest we approve the budgets for those, and then we wait for other items to be brought to the board. It could be next month. It sounds like nothing is urgent. I don't see, it doesn't make sense to me to approve the whole thing and then say, but you still have to come to the board for approval. You give approval once. That's how I prefer to proceed.
Thank you. One comment that I'd like to make, just out of my understanding, is that the details that have been provided in the budget actually went to that level of detail for everything else, which means it's harder for the board to take it because there's lots of information there, but there is an opportunity for the board to pick at each piece. So that my impression is this isn't that much different than with the whole budget.
Just to respond to that, there's a lot more detail here than, if you look at the line by line on the budget, you'll see a few words. You won't get any sense of what is essential and what is optional when you look at the budget.
Okay, correct. Yeah, I'll take that. Why is this important is not in the yeah.
Well, why it's not essential.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Carol.
I just wanted to respond to Eagle's question as to why I asked the question. And I think it was more about, and I could be off base, if the projects have been costed with a level of certainty that that's where they'll come in. But I'm imagining a scenario where, you know, the board might want to put more money into one initiative, and some of these initiatives might fall off because of that. So it's just giving the board as much information to make as informed decisions as they can based on the projects as they're prioritized and costed as they come to the board. That's all.
Yeah, an interesting discussion. I appreciate listening. I wonder if we can proceed with an approval for all projects subject to if detailed costing results in excess, a number that's in excess of any of these, then it needs to come back to the board. And you know, maybe we say in excess by 5% or 10% or something. But it sounds like quite a lot of work has been done into these areas. I'm hearing from staff these are all priorities. Two are more time sensitive, but the other ones are important. So the money is there. If they all come in on budget, great. If they don't, let's see it again. That's kind of what I would think.
You know, just on the point of saying they have to come back, they're only being approved for a certain amount, so they would automatically have to come back. We need to build that in.
Okay, last word, Eagle, I'm gonna call.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're already well into the fiscal year for which these projects are expected to be undertaken, or during which they're expected to be undertaken. So I think the time is now to either say yes or no. I mean, it doesn't mean that we have to, and we could always come back. But I'm just, you know, I would agree with the approach that you just suggested, that given that there is a cost control built in, that you know, assuming, I think correctly, that the staff has put work in coming up with, you know, estimates for the costing. If we think the projects are good, I think we should approve them to move forward.
Thanks, Eagle. I'm wondering, and I think the motion as it is probably adequate. Perhaps, Bill, did you want to move that?
I move that the board approve the funding of the proposed list of projects as circulated.
Second. Eagle. Further discussion? All in favor? Or none against? The motion passes. Good. It was an important conversation. Great. Okay, so now we have Finance and Audit Committee update and the year-end audit plan report of Athena. Or if she's presenting.
Yes, year-end has happened right now. It's happening right now. And I also lining up with the audit. Yeah, the details in front of you. And then the price seems that quoted in line with what we have in charge. So yeah, so I think, and the price is actually compared to the market, I think it's very, very fair and reasonable. So yeah, I think, and also I think by the AGM for 2023-24, and that also been voted in to continue to use Johnson Archer. So that being said, I think I also mentioned it in the report. The proposal is stated for 3 years, but we are not committing for all 3 years. So we are year by year. So it's very clear about that. But it's just how they do the proposal every time. So just want to make that, just want to state that to the board. Any question, feel free to.
Thank you, Athena. Questions? That's great. Thank you for this information and schedule. I particularly appreciate the schedule that's shown as you meet activities as you approach the AGM. This report will be required for. Okay. The next item is the capital reserve transfer. Yeah.
Is who's speaking again? Capital reserve policy has been approved, I believe, in January this year. So as year end is approaching, I would like to make a recommendation to move the amortization minus the, I actually even have to look at it myself, but so that contributed amount that is about $22,000 for before we move that amount to the reserve. So this year we're estimated to be close to $200,000. I don't have the exact amount yet because I'm still closing because that is but that will be with around $200,000 to add to our capital reserve. I think I do a calculation here. So by adding that, our reserve will be over $1 million. So that's a good number. Like close to $1 million. That's why.
Thank you, Athena. Does anyone want to add to that? No?
Sure. Now, the reason for bringing this forward now is that then it can be reflected in financial statements. And the last transfer was done well after the end of the fiscal year, so it wasn't reflected in the statement. So this would be a better approach.
Thank you very much. Questions about this? Perfect.
Sorry, Bill, can you just explain that again? The last time this was done, meaning a year ago, or?
That was, I forget when we did it, but it was well into the fiscal year. So taking the amortization amount rounded up for 2022-23, and it was sometime in the next fiscal year that we approved the transfer of the amortization amount from that fiscal year over to the capital reserve. So it wasn't reflected in the year-end financial statements. And this time, by approving this now, it will be reflected in the financial statements that are being prepared.
Which is a good thing.
Oh, it's always a good thing to have your financial.
Did I add something?
Athena, please add.
I think the to echo what Bill's point is because we didn't have a policy and then we didn't have the number. So the transfer for 2022-23 was done only January this year. So because by doing this right now, I can actually have that entry done for the 2023, like before the year-end closing. So we reflect accordingly in the financial statement. That being said, it's not limiting the board for transferring more money. If we have a good, if after year close that we want to transfer more money to the reserve, we can definitely do that. Yeah, but so it's not limiting us to do that. But by this action, it's just to make sure that the amortization amount minus that pieces is being allotted accordingly to the correct financial year to get it done. Yeah.
Thanks, Athena. Bill, would you like to make the motion?
I move that the board approve the transfer to the capital reserve. Start again. I move that the board approve a transfer to the capital reserve equal to the amortization amount for capital assets for fiscal year 2023-24 minus the amortization of the deferred capital contributions.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Equal. Any further questions or discussion items? All in favor? There are none opposed. The motion passes. Thank you. Good. Well, we're now up to the Governance and Human Resources Committee update. And our first item on that is the by-election and appointment process report. Chris, can you bring us through this?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. The report, of course, is before you to catch everybody up to speed. Of course, we've revised the by-election and appointment process that the board had reviewed back in February, and of course, incorporated some of its feedback. All noted, of course, the process right now might seem rather long-winded, but it's there to demonstrate that the thought process behind what's written has provided a comprehensive consideration of various likely scenarios. The summary that's included in the report regarding that process, I think, explains the broad strokes of how it works rather well. In essence, the process is separated into 3 distinct parts based off of the UNA's triennial election cycle. There's a list, of course, of the different changes that have been made, or at least the substantive ones, following the board's feedback back in February to date. We've also included, of course, in the report a cost breakdown that's been noted as a point of interest back in February to help understand the different scenarios regarding the financial implications of a by-election. I've also noted in the report, of course, that there's a disclaimer, as in the process as it's included in your packages will likely not be what's exactly implemented in bylaw and or policy statements. It will most likely, or if not definitely, be very different from it is. But instead, that the process here is to provide you with a general idea of the process as it relates to by-elections and appointments in regards to vacancies. The board, of course, if approving what you see in your package, will have to provide some consideration as to the next steps in terms of what should be included either in the bylaw and or policy statement, and of course, who would be involved in that process. The assumption here so far is that the JHR committee would provide some degree of stewardship here in terms of moving the process forward, and ultimately the board approving things for either in the case of policy approval or in the case of bylaw recommendation to the AGM. But of course, all of that has been included in the report as well. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Chris. Maybe I can add an additional amount. You've got a lot of detail in here, and even though things will look different, there's a lot of information here that is relevant, and we've talked about it. One example was this: if you just look at the beginning 3-year areas, in the year 1, vacancies in general are filled by appointment based on election results. If you read it on, in the case where this is not possible, the board would call a by-election instead. So this is so there is information on this. There's a lot there, and I think it's a good basis for us to proceed with the next steps. Our JHR committee has talked about it quite a bit. Now's the opportunity for the board to do this. Okay, so questions?
Yeah, well, chopping up, this looks really looks good. I think it captures a lot of things that we brought up earlier, so I really appreciate the work that Chris has done and that the JHR committee has done to revise this and keep thinking about it. Now, I noticed, let me just double check the page number. So on page 67 of the package, where you have the outline of the by-election and appointment process summary, the language there for the first year, the second year, the third year, et cetera, it says vacancies may be filled. And what I'm interested in hearing a bit more, I guess, probably from the committee members, but perhaps Chris can speak to this as well, is whether the may there indicates a kind of flexibility that, that this is the recommended that the board would fill vacancies, but that the board could, given this language or whatever we come up with, sort of at its discretion say, well, it might be better to just go ahead with a by-election in the first year, or for whatever reason, I can't quite envision it, but in year 2, a by-election doesn't seem advisable for some reason or another, and so then the board may, at their discretion, vote to go through an appointment process or et cetera, right? So is the may indicating a flexibility that's ultimately up to the decision of the board? And I just wanted to say that if that's the case, it seems more appropriate that this be in the policy category than in the bylaw category, because bylaws really should be clear and, not subject to not the whim of the board, but to change, a particular kind of anyway, it needs to be consistent. If you have a bylaw, you have to have something that is consistent in the way it would be applied. I'll pause there. I mean, I have thoughts on what I think is best, but I would just kind of put that question out there to get some clarity.
Okay, Chris, if you'd like to.
Just to clarify, as to why May is included, the exact process itself for the detailed version of it provides some explanation as to the scenarios in which, while, say, in the first year, the appointment ideally is based on election results, that isn't concrete in that the board might have no option in that case where there's no candidates that are eligible to appoint, or it simply decides not to fill it by that appointment, and instead it prefers to stay in the by-election. So the exact details explain why it's May in each of those scenarios. I could belabor it, but it might be easier just simply to read, but that's the clarification.
One additional point on that is I'll just point out, I think there are some details in a bylaw that would come out where we would expect the word shall instead of may. But I think I just point out our existing bylaw is the board may appoint a director in the event. That's in our bylaw already. And therefore, that word is not inherently unacceptable for a bylaw either. So, yeah, go ahead, Murray.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and it does provoke one's thought as to how prescriptive we want to be in the process here. And there's, of course, arguments both ways. I think there's, given the amount of time is spent on this and the fact that the current process doesn't really guide the board at all, it's just a may. There's I think merit in looking now, Chris, at the details on page 72 of the package. Section 1.1 could be modified to read: the board, as Richard alluded to, shall or will offer the vacant position to the candidate who receives the greatest number of votes, but then it's subject to the following conditions. If there are no such candidates that accept or are eligible to accept, those are two sort of caveats to that. The same would hold true for the second one if for some reason it's not practicable to hold a by-election in the time that is present. But I think, as I recall it, when we discussed it at the committee, we did, my sense was for the third year, some discretion might be warranted because as the board cycle is winding down, there's only a few months left. When do you make the call as to whether it's worth the trouble of trying to bring someone else on for that time? That seems warranted to leave that a little bit more open-ended. But the first two, hearing Eagle's question, I'm perhaps tipping my hand that I do favor being a little bit more prescriptive here and giving guidelines. You could still be at the policy level, but really suggesting that this is the procedure that is followed, unless various conditions are hold. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Murray. Bill.
Yeah, I think that, and maybe Chris should speak to this, but I think it already does what Murray has suggested. If you look at one, it says the board either can offer a position to someone, or if it doesn't do that, then there has to be a by-election. So the board has, according to if it's a policy, there has to be a by-election. 2 says there has to be a by-election. So it's only 3 where the board can choose not to do anything. So I think it's, Chris, am I right? I think it's already built in there.
Sorry, but just to compare the language, I see the board may offer the vacant position to the candidate who received the greatest number of votes. That seems...
Yeah, but you keep going. 1.1.2, if the board does not fill the vacancy in accordance with section 1.1, the vacancy must be filled pursuant to section 2. So, i.e. there must be a by-election. So you have to read further. And there's another condition here. Now, I don't want to get into the details, but 3 directors per neighborhood has to be one of the conditions too. You can't start having 4. But the main point I wanted to make is that I think there should be a lot of flexibility. It should be in a policy. There should be almost no bylaw changes. I think, this is not such an important matter that it needs to be hardwired into the bylaws, and the drafting for bylaws would be more difficult than it is for policy. Policy can be a bit looser. I would think about all you need in the bylaws is a provision that expands upon the one that's there now and says that the directors may hold a by-election, and just to give some authorization for a by-election in the bylaws, but leave everything else up to the directors. If you want to be a little more prescriptive, you could say generally following the process set out in the bylaws or something, but leave it all to policy. I think that would be much simpler than trying to draft a bunch of detailed rules into the bylaws. That wouldn't be so simple. So that would certainly be my strong recommendation, actually, to go that route as someone who has been very involved in drafting of bylaws over the years. Separate point I'd like to make is that if a vacancy occurs very beginning of year 2, you've got to wait till the end of near the end of the year before that vacancy is filled, at which point you begin to wonder, is there really any point filling it? So, and I understand the reason it was done is because of something like I raised it, and the others did, is that you don't want a by-election every time there's a vacancy because of the cost. But if they're going to be a email type electronic by-elections with no mailing out, so the cost is only the $6,700 or whatever it is, then there could be 2 by-elections in a year. I mean, it's much less expensive. And maybe the board should have flexibility in making that determination as well, whether to hold an earlier by-election in the second year. So, but I think overall, I think if we approve the motion, I think it's still got to come back to GHR to look more closely at the details that are then put into whatever approach is followed.
Thank you, Bill. I just want to make sure that, Chris, you've got out those comments. No? Okay, good.
Yeah, I want to second Bill's point that this is probably the details are best left to a policy for all kinds of reasons, but ultimately I think the board does determine how it fills vacancies, right? And so while these are it's a good set of guidelines for doing that, but the board should be in a position to, if for whatever reason, I think some variation on what's here is prudent, then to be able to pursue that. So that would be my reasoning. And when the very brief summary on that earlier page that I referred to, when it says may, but actually, as Marie and Bill together pointed out, that the detailed version on page 72, it does say one point, the section 1 may, but if not that, then uses the word then go to 2, which is a must. The by-election is a must, and then the last year is once again a may, and I can understand the reasoning for that greater flexibility at that time. So I think like generally speaking, that what is drafted there on that page 72 is in keeping with what I was hoping for out of this. So that's good. I agree with Bill that we need to, if at all possible, maintain the maximum of 3 per neighborhood. But I just would ask fellow board members. So in the case, of that initial appointment where you're working, the first year where you're working from the prior election, then you can follow that, right? You go down to the next person who is not the 4th from a neighborhood. cetera, so that works. We may want to leave flexibility in year 3 for an appointment process. I don't know, but
There is flexibility there.
in terms of the neighborhood as well, the neighborhood requirement, because sometimes you put out a call for nominations and maybe there aren't many, so that's, I think, balancing that neighborhood representation with the need to have a functioning, dedicated, skilled board is worth considering.
Thank you very much. What I'm hearing is, I think with the comments that we've heard, we can ask staff to do what's proposed here. So I'm going to proceed with a motion that board direct staff to draft the bylaw amendments in consultation with legal counsel and policy statement that reflect the general process described in the report as circulated. And comment on the second. Vern? Discussion? All in favor? Motion passes. Great, thank you. Okay, so we're on to our next one, and this is the corporate policy framework. Chris, again.
Keep it brief to not keep us away from dinner. Of course, the report is before you, a brief summary as to the corporate policy. It's intended to outline the development and regulatory structure of UNA's corporate policies. In other words, what it's doing is aims to establish the standards and steps that would normally be followed when creating a corporate policy. Of course, differentiating between corporate policies and other established procedures. Of course, delineating between policies that the board approves and policies that the CAO approves as well. Some of the provisions in the draft policy seem fairly obvious from a procedural or governance standpoint, and not new, such as the existence of policies that are created by the board or the CAO, but they're included in this policy primarily to clarify that this framework does exist in part, and what are the other standards that we normally work with as it relates to corporate policies. The report, of course, explains more as to how this framework will impact the policies as well as some of our existing corporate policies as well. I'll note, of course, that Bill has kindly shared some feedback regarding the drafts, and the comments are most substantially concerning the matters in which board and administrative policies regulate, as well as how they're defined. I'd be happy, of course, to provide a revised draft at the next meeting, assuming that the board would prefer that over the draft that's currently circulated as well. Of course, I'll let Bill explain some of his feedback if need be as well. But with that, of course, happy to answer any question, receive additional feedback.
Thanks, Chris. Maybe before we get to Bill, are there other comments that we should address from anyone else? Your questions? Okay, Bill, please.
Yeah, I've pointed out to Chris a few drafting issues, and this draft policy could use some revisions to fix a few things up. I won't go through them, other than I'll just point out one, or two definitions. You never put something substantive in a definition, which this sort of does. It's not quite clear what it's doing. And the second is the board is responsible for the approval of board policies. Well, board policies are policies approved by the board, so the board is responsible for the approval of policies approved by the board. It's circular. So there are a few things like that. Not very many, but I think this would benefit from a little bit of revision, and then it could come in final form to the next board meeting.
Okay. Those revisions sound like revisions for clarity, but not revisions for maybe substance. Well,
there's one substantive point, I guess, that we should discuss. Nothing too serious, but there's a requirement that all policies be reviewed within a 3-year period. That I don't know, it seems to be that maybe too frequent. You know, and I think, for example, of the CAO duties, et cetera, policy, or the delegation policy and so on, to have to review those every 3 years seems unnecessary. If there are policies where there's an issue with a policy, I'm sure they'll be brought to the board anyway for amendment. So it seems a little bit like a make work project more than a necessity to do that, to do a review every 3 years. And something else I pointed out that is maybe not substantive, but the board's responsible for reviewing board policies. Well, the board usually doesn't do that. The staff would review board policies and bring recommendations to the board. So I don't know that you want to put the onus on staff to review policies. I'm sorry, on the board to review policies. So those are a couple of the more substantive. But basically, it would be what you see here, but drafted, fixed up more.
Thank you, Bill. Questions regarding these or statements? One item just regarding the 3-year review process. When I read that, in my mind, it was because our electoral process is every 3 years we have an election. So a board director, any given board director in a 3-year period, generally, I mean, we talked about by-elections and things, but all things considered equal, every board director would have at least one chance to look at the board policies. They may not, it could be a cursory look, but it would be certainly an opportunity that they would be placed before the board to just be made aware of and looked at. Not necessarily extensively reviewed, but certainly reviewed in the sense of placed before the board. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, on that point, now that the policies are available to board members, any board member who's interested could look through them and bring a policy forward on their own initiative. So, I think the reality is most board members, particularly when they're new, they're not going to sit down and read all the policies anyway. So they're not going to do a review of them. They're going to rely on staff to point out something, items that may need fixing up and changing. So I'm not sure I buy that. And plus the 3 years may not be on the election cycle at all. It doesn't necessarily coincide with each new board. So I would suggest that it be more like 5 years or not at all, and just, you know, when a policy seems to be dated, that it then be considered. But for 3 seems a little too frequent to me.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think, you know, best practice from a policy standpoint, generally that 3 to 5 year periods, and your policy framework is essentially consistently evergreen. You're always reviewing them. And frankly, organizations that I've worked in previously, because there isn't that kind of delineation in policy, they quite often get very stale dated. Even in our current framework, there's quite a few there. The list is not very long in comparison to other larger organizations, but there are policies that are out of date that do warrant maybe not a fulsome review, but at least a look at them to see what needs to be updated. So from my perspective, I would encourage the board to put something in there, whether it's felt that 3 is too short, I think that's fine, 5 is fine as well. So I think it's important that there is something in that as well.
I'll just add that the general three-year review cycle that's mentioned in the draft policy is in respect to policies that don't have an existing review timeline. So if we establish a policy sometime in the future that has, say, a 10-year review timeline, that 3-year review timeline wouldn't apply. That policy would be outside of the scope of that. And so initially, since most of our corporate policies do not include a review timeline, the initial work will be more than it would be in the future, simply because we would have to take a look at some of our policies. Then for some of them, it would maybe be more comprehensive, simply because the content might be very out of date. Some others are very current, so it would just simply warrant taking a look at and saying, that's fine. So while the 3-year review timeline might mean there's some work in the first few years following an approval of this type of policy in its current draft, the future is a lot less because you would prescribe shorter but also likely longer review timelines in those policies that the 3-year timeline would not apply as well. But again, flexible on that 3-year. That's there as a point of discussion too.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any other comments? Yeah, having heard this, I think the board is now aware of that one place, and I think we're in a position where we could just pass this back to Chris for revisions according to what Bill has suggested, and we can bring it to the board next month. Is the board in agreement with that? Okay, that's great. Thank you. Very good. I think we're at the point we can adjourn for.
Well, there's one more item.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Bill, did not do that on purpose. I just was on writing. Too much writing on my.
Won't take long. Won't take long.
Okay, Bill, the neighbors agreement.
Okay, well, not a lot has happened. Oops, sorry. Not a lot has happened in the last 6 days since we met, but a couple of things have. The version 3 that you saw a draft of the body of the neighbors agreement was sent to UBC that night. So revised to reflect the discussion in the meeting and sent to UBC that night. Meeting's been set up for May the 1st to discuss it. So it will move along fairly sharply, I hope. And the only other thing to report is that there's a couple of legal issues, and one of them has to do with snow removal, de-icing, and its exposure to liability, and its exposure more generally to liability with what it's taking on. And we'll be meeting online with the lawyer, UNA's lawyer, on Thursday to get the lawyer going on the issues. But that's it.
Thank you. Questions or? We had a great meeting the other day, and I think that's probably why we don't have any questions now. So it's very good. Thank you for bringing us up to speed. Okay. Well, now we're going to move that the board adjourn into a closed session to discuss matters that are related to discussions and dealings with other entities or individuals where disclosure of the information being discussed could be harmful to the UNA's interests. The approval of minutes for closed session or restricted closed session of a board meeting. Second. Motion is approved. We are adjourned, and I'm going to set the time for coming back.
Finish by 8:30.
Oh, you just jinxed us, Bill.
Watch the end of the hockey.
Right?
Watch hockey.
I know, exactly.